I remember the day clearly. It was my son Jacob's 8th birthday party. As a single mother, I wanted to make sure it was a day to remember, filled with laughter and joy. I hired a clown named Bobo to entertain the kids, hoping to bring some extra fun to the celebration. Bobo arrived right on time, wearing a brightly colored costume and a big red nose. He seemed perfect with his silly antics and endless jokes. But something felt off, even from the beginning. "Hey, kids, who wants to see a magic trick?" Bobo asked, his voice cheerful. The children cheered, oblivious to the subtle unease in his tone. As the party went on, I noticed Bobo making odd comments that seemed strangely personal. "Jacob, you remind me so much of your father," he said, staring at my son. The comment made me shiver. How could he know about Jacob's father? I never mentioned him to anyone, especially not to a clown I hired for the day. "Where did you hear about Jacob's father?" I asked Bobo, trying to keep my voice steady. He just laughed it off, saying, "Oh, I must have guessed right." The kids didn't notice anything wrong. They were too busy enjoying the tricks and games. But my unease grew with each passing minute. Why did Bobo seem so familiar with us? His eyes, though hidden behind makeup, felt too intense, too knowing. After the party, as I was cleaning up, I found Bobo's business card. The face on the card didn't match the clown who had just left my house. My heart started to race. Who was he? "Mom, where's Bobo going?" Jacob asked, pointing to the gate. I looked out and saw Bobo getting into a plain white van. It struck me as odd. Shouldn't a clown have a more colorful vehicle? Feeling a knot of dread, I went online to search for Bobo the clown. What I found made my blood run cold. There was a news article about a dangerous fugitive who had escaped from a nearby prison. The escapee was last seen disguised as a clown. The article had a mugshot that looked eerily similar to the man who had been at my house. Could it really be him? I called the number on the business card, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic set in as I dialed the local police. 911, what's your emergency? I think a dangerous fugitive was at my house today, disguised as a clown. He was at my son's birthday party. I stammered. The dispatcher took my information and assured me that officers were on their way. Within minutes, police cars surrounded my house. I showed them the business card and explained everything that had happened. An officer looked at me with grave concern. "Ma'am, the real Bobo the clown never showed up for your party. We received a report that he was found unconscious in his home this morning." My heart pounded as the reality of the situation sank in. The man who had been in my house around my son and his friends was a dangerous fugitive. "Don't you know where he went?" The officer asked urgently. "He drove off in a white van," I replied, my voice shaking. "He left just a few minutes ago." The officers quickly set up a perimeter and began their search. They assured me they would find him, but the fear and guilt of having let a stranger into my home still haunts me. How could I have missed the signs? The party that was meant to bring joy turned into a nightmare. I hugged Jacob tightly, thankful that he was safe. But the image of that clown, his unsettling comments, and the way he knew too much will forever be etched in my mind. I remember the day my grandmother gave my daughter, Lily, that vintage clown doll. It had a porcelain face, painted with a permanent smile, and a faded costume that hinted at its age. "I thought Lily might like this," Grandma said, her eyes twinkling with nostalgia. Lily was thrilled, hugging the doll tightly and naming it Mr. Giggles. The first night, Lily woke up screaming. "Mr. Giggles whispered to me," she said, her little face pale with fear. My husband, Mark, and I exchanged worried glances, but we chalked it up to an overactive imagination. After all, children often have vivid dreams, right? "Sweetie, it's just a doll," I reassured her, tucking her back into bed. But the nightmares continued, and Lily's claims grew more unsettling. "What does he say to you?" I asked one morning, trying to hide my concern. "He says he's lonely and wants to play," Lily whispered, clutching the doll tightly. Mark and I decided to keep a closer eye on her. The things only got stranger. One night, after putting Lily to bed, we heard faint laughter echoing through the house. We dismissed it as the wind or perhaps a distant television. But then we started finding Mr. Giggles in different places we hadn't left him. "Did you move the doll?" I asked Mark one morning, holding Mr. Giggles, who was now sitting on the kitchen counter. "No, I thought you did," he replied, his brow furrowing. The unease in our home was growing, and we couldn't ignore it any longer. Determined to find answers, I began researching the doll's origins. After hours of searching, I found an old article about a circus performer named Freddie the Clown, who had died tragically in a fire. According to the article, Freddie had an uncanny attachment to his clown doll, claiming it was his most cherished possession. Rumor had it that his spirit haunted the doll, refusing to let go even in death. "Do you think it could be true?" I asked Mark, showing him the article. "Haunted dolls. It sounds ridiculous," he scoffed, but his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. We decided to get rid of Mr. Giggles, hoping to bring peace back to our home. I wrapped the doll in an old blanket and drove to a thrift store, leaving it there without a second thought. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, but our relief was short-lived. The next morning, Lily ran into our bedroom, holding Mr. Giggles. "Look, he came back," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder. My heart sank. How was this possible? We had left the doll miles away. Desperation set in as we tried everything to get rid of it. We burned it, buried it, even threw it in the river. But every time, Mr. Giggles would return, always in perfect condition, always back in Lily's arms. Why won't he leave us alone? I cried one night, tears streaming down my face. Mark held me close, his own fear palpable. Maybe we need to confront it," he suggested. That night, we sat in Lily's room, the doll between us. "Mr. Giggles, if Freddie is here, what do you want?" I whispered, feeling foolish yet desperate. The room grew cold, and faint laughter echoed around us. "Play with me," a soft voice whispered, sending chills down my spine. Realizing we had no other choice, we decided to give Mr. Giggles the attention he craved. We included him in our family activities, hoping to appease the spirit. Over time, the disturbances lessened, and Lily's nightmares stopped. Though the doll remains in our home, the fear has faded. We've learned to live with Mr. Giggles, accepting that some things can't be explained or discarded. The clown doll's presence is a reminder that the past, no matter how haunting, can find its way into our lives, and sometimes we must make peace with it to move forward. My name is David, and I'm a 20-year-old sophomore at Riverside College. Last month, while browsing a local thrift store for a Halloween costume, I found an old clown mask. It was unsettling, with faded colors and a sinister grin. Perfect for the party, I thought. That night, I wore it and had a blast. But when I got home, I started experiencing vivid nightmares. Each night, I dreamed of a clown chasing me through dark, twisted streets. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. Soon, I noticed something else: unexplained bruises and cuts on my body. At first, I dismissed them, but they became harder to ignore. My friends began to notice my erratic behavior and the faint smell of decay that seemed to follow me. I couldn't focus on my studies, and my grades were slipping. One day, I decided to research the mask's history. I discovered it had belonged to a deranged clown named Jasper, who used it during his crime spree in the 1980s before being shot by the police. The mask was believed to be cursed, causing anyone who wore it to suffer Jasper's wrath. Desperate, I tried to destroy the mask. I burned it, smashed it, but nothing worked. The nightmares intensified, and I could feel Jasper's presence growing stronger. One night, the dream felt different. It was more vivid, more real. Jasper was no longer just chasing me. He was taunting me, telling me I couldn't escape. Waking up, I found myself in the same alley from my nightmares, with blood on my hands. Panicking, I ran back to my dorm, but the smell of decay was overwhelming. My friends, now terrified of me, kept their distance. I knew I had to confront Jasper's spirit directly. In the dead of night, I went to the place where Jasper was killed, wearing the mask one last time. As I stood there, the air grew cold, and I felt a hand on my shoulder. "You can't escape me, David," a voice whispered. I turned around, and there he was, the clown from my nightmares. This time, I didn't run. I faced him, determined to end this. But as Jasper's laughter echoed through the night, I realized some horrors can't be defeated. They can only be endured.